My name is Ella. I'm 14. And for most of my life, I only had one rule that I promised myself I'd never break, no matter how messy life got, no matter how many times my world was rearranged. That rule was never forget Dad. Not just because he was my father, but because he was the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. When my parents divorced, it didn't come as a shock. The yelling had become wallpaper. Their silence at breakfast felt louder than any fight. And when he finally packed his bags and kissed my forehead one last time at the door, I told myself I wouldn't cry. Not in front of Mom. Not for her to say, "Don't be dramatic, Ella." He moved 2 states away for work. He promised he'd visit when he could. But the calls, the nightly ones where he'd ask about my day, my drawings, even the silly books. I was writing in my notebooks, they kept me sane. They made the empty chair at dinner easier to look at. But then came Jason Dot. I remember the first time Mom said his name like it belonged in our house. "Jason's coming over tonight. Be polite." That was it. No introduction, no explanation. Just orders. I had to set an extra plate at the table for a man I didn't know. And when he arrived, everything about him screamed that he already felt entitled to the air in our kitchen. Jason had that kind of presence, the kind that's too loud even. When he's not speaking, he was always laughing a little too hard, commenting on things that weren't his business. And worst of all, he touched things. My sketchbook, my books, even the stuffed rabbit Dad gave me when I was 7. He picked it up, sneered, and tossed it back like it was a piece of garbage Dot at first. I told myself it was just temporary. Mom had dated before. Those guys never lasted, but Jason did. He started staying over more and more. His toothbrush appeared beside hers. His boots were next to the door. And then one morning he was just there at breakfast. Every day. And Mom didn't act like this was something strange. She acted like this was the plan all along. Then the names started. "Ella, tell your dad what happened at school today." And I froze. I stared at her like she'd just sworn at me. Jason looked up from his coffee, smiling, waiting. I shook my head. "He's not my dad." My mom's face hardened. "Don't be disrespectful. He's helping raise you now." That night, I didn't speak to either of them. I locked my door. And I cried, but things only got worse from there. Jason began demanding I call him Dad, not asking demanding. If I didn't, he'd pretend not to hear me. If I asked for something, he'd ignore it unless I addressed him the way he wanted. "Try again," he'd say with that smug look. Say it right. But I never gave in. Not once. I called him Jason. Sometimes I didn't call him anything. At all Dot, my mom didn't defend me. She joined him. Started saying things like, "Ella, don't be ungrateful," or "Jason's trying. You need to try too." Try? Try what? Pretend? Forget. She didn't understand. Or maybe she didn't care. Still, every night, I'd sneak into the bathroom, lock the door, and call my real dad. I'd tell him everything. Well, not everything. I didn't tell him that Jason had once slammed the door so hard it cracked my wall. I didn't tell him about the time Jason followed me into my room to lecture me because I'd forgotten to take the trash out. I didn't want Dad to worry. He already felt guilty for leaving. I could hear it in his voice. The last thing I wanted was to make him feel worse, that I missed him. Not just as a person, but as a presence. As proof that there were still adults in this world who didn't want to break you down to feel bigger. Jason walked around like our house belonged to him. Like I was the problem he had to fix. And Mom? She watched it happen and looked the other way. Sometimes I wondered if she even noticed me anymore, or if I was just the final inconvenience left over from her old life. That's when the drawings stopped. That's when my notebooks stayed closed. That's when I stopped laughing at things. It was like my voice had been packed away with Dad's. Old boxes Dot, and yet every night, through a whisper, through a cracked phone speaker, I still heard my father say, "I love you, Elle. You don't have to pretend for anyone." That's when I knew. I never called Jason Dad. Not out loud. Not in my heart. No matter how much pressure they put on me. No matter how alone they tried to make me feel. Because even though I had to survive in their house, my truth still had a home and my real father hadn't gone anywhere. Not really. He was just waiting for the day I'd speak loud enough for the world to hear what they were trying to silence. The morning Jason moved in for good, nothing was said. No announcement, no invitation to talk, no question of whether I was okay. With it, I just came downstairs for breakfast and saw his suitcase by the door and his coat on Dad's old hook. It wasn't even winter. He'd put it there on purpose, like he wanted to erase what that space used to mean. Mom was in the kitchen, acting like this was the most natural thing in the world. Toast on the table, she said, without looking at me. Jason sat in Dad's chair. Not by accident, he had picked it deliberately, leaned back in it like it belonged to him now. That was the first day I didn't sit down for breakfast. I turned around and went back to my room. Nobody followed. I remember standing by my window that day, staring at the oak tree in the backyard, the same tree Dad used to rake leaves under, while I jump into the piles like it was the highlight of the season. We used to laugh so hard we couldn't breathe. Now the tree looked like a ghost of that laughter, something tall and silent that remembered everything, even if no one else did. After Jason moved in, the house changed. It wasn't just the furniture that shifted or the fact that my favorite mug disappeared mysteriously the day after he used it. It was the way Aaron moved differently. He was always there, lurking in the living room, peeking into the kitchen, watching TV so loud you could hear it upstairs. There was no more quiet, no more safety. He started asking questions I didn't want to answer. Why are you so moody all the time? What's with the attitude? You're lucky I put up with this. And Mom, she just sipped her coffee and nodded along like every jab he made was somehow reasonable. It wasn't long before my name stopped sounding like my name. From them, it sounded more like a complaint. My room became my only sanctuary, but even that was taken from me piece by piece. Jason thought knocking was optional. He'd burst in with house rules and scold me for leaving my laundry too long in the washer or for spending too much time on the phone. Once, he picked up my sketchbook from the bed and flipped through it without asking. Still drawing this junk? He smirked, tossing it onto the floor like it meant nothing. I didn't say a word. I just picked it up and closed the door behind him. I began calling Dad in shorter whispers. I didn't want Jason to overhear. He'd already made comments like, maybe it's not healthy for her to be clinging to him so much. And Mom? She started scheduling things during the times Dad and I usually talked. Oh, sorry, honey, we're going out tonight. You can call him later. Later never came. One night, I found myself staring at a photo of Dad and me from the science fair in 3rd grade. I'd built a volcano, nothing special, but he stood beside me like I'd created the universe. Jason had never even asked what my favorite subject was. He didn't care. I was just a bump in his new domestic fantasy. Mom's eyes began to change too. It was subtle at first, less softness, more calculation. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped noticing when I skipped meals. It was like she was trying to erase the part of her life that included me, and Dad, as if replacing my father meant replacing me too. Then one Saturday morning, while Jason was out, I found a crumpled piece of paper on the kitchen counter. It was a family schedule he had drafted. His handwriting was all over it. At the top it read, Dad equals Jason. Like it was law. Like the simple act of writing it could overwrite history. My chest tightened. That was the moment I realized they weren't just hoping I'd forget my father. They were planning it, rewriting the story around me, reshaping the home I once knew into something unrecognizable. I felt like a visitor in my own life. Like someone had stolen the script and handed me a new one I never agreed to perform. So I stopped eating dinner. With them, I took my meals upstairs. I stopped watching TV in the living room. I wore headphones even when the music wasn't playing. I began to disappear on purpose, because disappearing was the only power I had left. They couldn't twist what they couldn't see. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I wasn't alone. That Dad was still there, still calling, still listening. That every time Jason mocked me, and every time Mom stood by and let him, I would text my father and he'd respond with the same 3 words. You're not crazy. I wasn't crazy, they were, for thinking love could be replaced, that authority meant affection, that forcing me to accept a lie would make it truth. Jason may have moved in. He may have taken the seat at the table, the hook by the door, even the word Dad, but he never earned it. And deep down, no matter how much my mother pretended otherwise, she knew it too. It was a Friday night, the kind that used to mean movie marathons and Dad's homemade popcorn in the living room. But ever since Jason moved in, Fridays became formal, uncomfortable dinners where Mom insisted we all sit together, like a real family. Only it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. That night, the table was already set when I came downstairs. 2 candles flickered between dishes that looked too fancy for a regular Friday salmon. Roasted vegetables, cloth napkins. Mom had even pulled out the good wine glasses, though she only filled them with sparkling juice. I stood by the doorway, half hoping I'd be told I could eat in my room again. But she saw me. "There you are," she said with forced cheer. "Come, sit down. We're waiting on you." Jason looked up, already seated at the head of the table like he belonged there. He gave me this fake smile, the kind people wear when they're trying too hard. "Evening, Ella," he said, too casually. I sat down slowly, every muscle tense. The food smelled good, but I wasn't hungry. For a while, it was quiet. They talked about work, groceries, how the neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking. I stared at my plate. Then Mom said something that made the fork freeze midair in my hand. "You know, Ella," she began, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "I think it's time we all start making an effort to move forward as a family. Don't you agree?" I looked at her, then at Jason, who now leaned forward with a glint in his eye. "It would mean a lot," he said, "if you started calling me Dad. Just think of how much easier it'd be." Silence. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard him right. But then Mom smiled. That same smile she used to use on teachers when pretending everything was perfect. "Yes," she said. "You're nearly grown now. It's time to adjust." Jason has been more than patient. I blinked, stunned. My chest burned. My tongue felt frozen. Jason reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. I jerked it back so fast, I knocked over my glass. It spilled all over the tablecloth, but no one moved to clean it. Everyone just stared. "I'm not calling him." "That," I said, my voice quiet but trembling. Mom's face dropped, the way it always did when I didn't play along. "Ella, don't be difficult. He's not my father." She slammed her fork down. "Well, he's the man in this house now, and he deserves your respect." That word, respect, hung in the air like poison. Respect? For the man who mocked my drawings? Who walked into my room uninvited? Who treated me like a burden he hadn't signed up for? Jason sighed dramatically. "You know, it's not like I wanted to be the bad guy here. I'm trying, really trying. But maybe we've made this too easy for her." I stood up. "Too easy?" Mom stood too, her voice rising. "Sit down, Ella. You're not going to ruin this dinner just because you miss your father. He's still my dad," I snapped. "And he doesn't need replacing." Jason muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch it, but it made Mom flinch. That told me enough. Whatever mask he wore around her, it slipped, even if just. For a second, she saw it, and still she chose him. I left my plate untouched and walked away. I could hear Mom calling after me, but I didn't stop. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, shut my door, and locked it. Later that night, I texted Dad. They made me say it. Tried to anyway. I didn't. He responded in seconds. "I know who you are, sweetheart. You don't owe anyone that word." I cried quietly into my pillow that night, not because of the fight, but because of what was becoming painfully clear. My mom wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She had made a choice. And I wasn't part of it anymore, but I would be okay, because I hadn't let them take everything. Not yet. Now the ticking was the only sound keeping me company. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it stares back at you. I sat on the floor of my bedroom and pulled out an old shoebox from under my bed. Inside were photos from a time when smiles came easily, when birthdays had both parents, and when the house still felt like a home. My real home. There was one photo I hadn't looked at in a long time. It was me, probably around 7, standing between my mom and dad, all of us covered in cake frosting from a kitchen disaster that ended in laughter. I stared at it, fingers trembling slightly. My father had his arm around both of us, but my mom, my real mom, not the person she had become, was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. That photo wasn't just a memory. It was proof that love used to live here. I decided to start scanning those photos, not for nostalgia, but as resistance, a quiet rebellion. For every memory they tried to erase, I would preserve one. For every story Jason told about how my dad had abandoned us, I would hold up a photo like a shield. This was like truth. Not the one my mother tried to rewrite with her new life and her new boyfriend and her. Forced smiles dot as I organized the pictures. I found one that broke something inside me. It was my 10th birthday. My dad had baked the cake himself. It was lopsided, with uneven frosting and crooked candles. But I was beaming. And next to me, holding the cake, was my dad proudly wearing a birthday hat. In the corner of the photo, my mom looked distant. Even back then, that image stayed with me all day at dinner. I didn't speak much. Jason went on about something meaningless, how the lawn needed mowing, or how he might upgrade the security system. Mom laughed at his jokes like they were gold, her hand resting on his arm like they were in some perfect love story. I wanted to scream. Instead, I excused myself, went back to my room and opened my email. "Hey, Dad," I typed. "Do you still have that recipe for your weird lopsided chocolate cake?" Within minutes, he responded. I've been waiting for this message for 5 years. That night, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the distance, the betrayal, the loneliness. It was real. And yet, so was the love I had once known. The next morning, I started printing the photos. I bought a scrapbook with money I had saved from tutoring and began writing captions beneath each one. Not generic ones, real ones. Dad helped me build this. Mom used to sing this song. This was the day I knew I was loved. The book wasn't just for me. It was my way of holding on to who I was before Jason, before everything crumbled. I hid the scrapbook at school in my locker, safe from Jason's wandering eyes, safe from my mother's attempts to sanitize our lives into something picture-perfect and hollow. I carried it with me like armor. It was a strange thing, how something as simple as a photograph could feel like resistance. But it was. Every image was a refusal to forget, a refusal to let go of the father they tried to push out of my life. The more I looked at them, the more I remembered. The sound of his voice reading to me at night, the way he carried me when I fell asleep in the car, the quiet pride in his eyes when I brought home a drawing from school. Jason had none of that. And he never would. Eventually, my mother noticed I was pulling away. She asked if everything was okay, her voice too sweet to be sincere. I nodded because what was I going to say? That I was building a sanctuary of memories to shield myself from her decisions? I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet, but something inside me had shifted. My grief wasn't a weight anymore, it was fuel. And I was just beginning to understand how strong I could be. And soon, so would they. It started as something small, just another school assignment. Just another piece of paper that would probably end up stuffed in the bottom of my backpack. We were given a simple prompt. Write about someone who inspires. You, that's all. A 1-page essay. No big deal. But for me, it was everything. The day the assignment was announced, I felt the room shrink. Kids started whispering names. My mom, my grandpa, Coach Evans. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't know who to write about, but because I knew exactly who not to write about. And that would be a problem. When I got home, that day, Jason was in the kitchen, talking to Mom about how his promotion was inevitable now. She laughed too hard again. I walked past them like a ghost, up the stairs into the only space that still felt like mine. I closed the door, sat on the floor, and pulled out the paper. I didn't hesitate. I wrote about my dad. I wrote about how he never missed a birthday. Even after the divorce, how he'd send handmade cards with dumb jokes and doodles that somehow always made me laugh. I wrote about how he listened, really listened, even when I didn't have the right words. About how he taught me what kindness looked like without ever raising his voice. I wrote about the way he always told me, you don't have to be loud to matter. It was the first time in months that writing didn't feel like a burden. When I finished, I sat in silence. The house below me was buzzing with Jason's laugh and the clink of wine glasses. But in that moment, I felt more connected to someone 2 states away than the people 10 feet below me. I folded the paper, tucked it into my backpack, and felt a strange sense of peace. Until the next day that my teacher read the essays in class, one by one, without names. It was her way of honoring our words, letting the message shine without bias. When she got to mine, the room shifted. I could feel it. The silence grew heavy, and I knew it was mine. When she finished, I saw a few heads turn toward me, but she didn't say anything. She just looked at me with a knowing expression and nodded once, Later that afternoon, she pulled me aside. "Ella," she said gently, "that was beautiful. Would you consider reading it at the school assembly next week?" I froze. Speak? In front of everyone? My heart thudded in my chest. "You don't have to decide now," she added. "Just think about it." I walked home slowly that day, the essay folded neatly in my pocket. The idea terrified me, but also, it felt like a chance. A voice, my voice. Not filtered through Jason or silenced by my mother's guilt. Just me. I should have kept it to myself. That night, I was in the kitchen, heating leftovers while Jason fiddled with something on his phone. Mom walked in, rummaging through my backpack for some reason she never explained. And then I saw it. She froze. Pulled out the essay. "What's this?" she asked, even though she already knew. Jason reached for it, scanned the first few lines, and scoffed. "Seriously? You wrote about him?" I snatched it back, my hand shaking. "It's none of your business." Jason stepped closer. "Actually, it is. If you're going to stand up in front of this school and embarrass this family." "Embarrass?" I snapped. "By telling the truth?" My mom didn't say a word. She just looked at Jason. He turned to her. "You're really okay with this? After everything I've done for both of you?" Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Doubt? I couldn't tell. But she didn't defend me. Not that night. Not ever. I went to bed with my essay under my pillow, heart pounding, stomach sick. I didn't know if I'd still be allowed to speak at the assembly. I didn't know what they'd try next. But I knew one thing. I wasn't changing a word. When you're forced to live in a lie for long enough, the truth becomes your only weapon. And I was finally ready to use mine. I didn't expect him to find the essay. That page was supposed to be my truth, tucked neatly between the lines of a school assignment no one was supposed to care about except my teacher. But I should have known better. Jason had a habit of poking into what didn't belong to him, and this time, he found something he couldn't control. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I printed my final draft in the school library and left it on the dining table after dinner. Just for a moment while I got my backpack. I should have known. When I came back, it was gone. I froze. Jason was still in the kitchen, swirling a glass of soda like he was at a dinner party. He didn't look up. "Where's my paper?" I asked. He gave me that smirk, the one that always came before something cruel. "You mean the essay?" he said. "The one you wrote for class?" I nodded slowly, dread rising. "I read it," he sighed, taking a sip, still smiling. "Beautiful fairy tale. Too bad it's fiction." My chest tightened. "Give it back." But he didn't. Not then, not the next morning either. Instead, when I walked into school, I was called to the principal's office. I thought maybe someone had found my journal or that I'd been accused of cheating on a test. But when I sat down, Principal Hayes looked at me the way adults do when they're not sure if you're a liar or a victim. "Ella," she said gently, "your stepfather dropped off your essay this morning. He had concerns." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "He said you've been experiencing emotional distress," she continued. "That the essay may be a cry for help." I blinked at her. "A cry for help?" "He mentioned that your relationship with your biological father is complicated, but it may be contributing to unstable behavior." It was like being slapped with something invisible. I could barely form words. "There's nothing wrong with me." "I believe you," she said quickly, "but I'm required to follow up. There may be a counselor involved for a short while, just to make sure everything at home is appropriate." Jason hadn't just crossed a line. He had dragged me across it, into a world where my memories were questioned, my feelings treated like symptoms, and my truth repackaged as delusion. He didn't just hate that I wrote about my father, he wanted to punish me for it. Erase. The very idea that someone else could matter more than him. Later that day, I found the essay folded and stuffed into the front pocket of my locker. It smelled like his cologne. He hadn't even tried to hide it. On the back, written in red pen like some kind of twisted correction, were the words, "You need to grow up." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the paper into shreds, but I didn't. I smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my notebook. Because what Jason didn't understand, what he never would understand, was that my father wasn't just someone I admired. He was the reason I hadn't disappeared. Completely, he was the proof that love didn't have to be conditional. That I could still be someone worth protecting, even when my own mother looked away. That night, I called my dad from the bathroom with the fan on. I told him everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm coming. I don't care what it takes." I cried into my hand to muffle the sound. Jason could drag my name into an office. He could twist my words, smear my intentions, and try to shrink me into silence. But he would never change the truth, and the truth had just begun to fight back. The school assembly was supposed to be the one bright spot in a month of gray. I had been chosen to read my essay aloud during the Voices of Courage presentation and event where students shared personal stories that inspired others. When my teacher first told me I was selected, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not for Jason, not for pretending, but for telling the truth, for choosing to speak about the one person who had never stopped believing in me, my real dad. But that morning, 2 days after the principal meeting, everything changed. Mrs. Halpern, my teacher, met me outside homeroom. She didn't smile like usual. Her voice was quiet. "Ella, there's been a change to the speaker list." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "The administration thinks it would be better if you didn't read your piece. They're concerned it may stir things up at home." My face went hot. My throat closed. I understood instantly. Jason had gotten to them. He'd won. Again, I didn't say anything. I just nodded and walked to my seat, but something cracked inside me. Not loud or dramatic, just a silent splinter deep in my chest where peace to sit. The worst part wasn't being silenced. It was realizing that my story, my voice, could be taken away because someone else found it inconvenient. That being honest could make you the problem. That telling the truth could cost you the only moment you were finally being seen. I stayed quiet the rest of the day. Even when friends asked why my name was gone from the program. Even when Jason picked me up after school and didn't bother hiding his smugness. Probably for the best. He said, tapping the wheel, "You don't want to embarrass yourself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But I didn't. That night, I didn't eat. I stared at the ceiling for hours. And when I finally turned off the light, I made a promise to myself, not out loud, not even in a whisper. Just a thought, solid and clear. They could take the microphone. They could rewrite the program. But they wouldn't erase my voice. And maybe, just maybe, someone else believed that too. The next morning, right before the assembly, I opened my locker and found a small folded note tucked inside my books. It was written in careful cursive. I recognized the handwriting instantly. "If they won't let you speak, I will. Meet me backstage at the end. Mage." My heart started racing. Mrs. Halpern hadn't given up on me. Maybe the world hadn't either. The auditorium buzzed with the sound of folding chairs, nervous students, and the shuffle of printed programs. Parents filled the rows. Teachers stood along the walls, eyes scanning for order. It was the Voices of Courage assembly, something that, up until this morning, I had believed was meant for me. I had no seat on stage, no name in the program, no mention in the announcements. Jason had made sure of that. The principal, perhaps hoping to avoid domestic conflict, had backed down. My mom? She didn't even ask why I wasn't participating. She just said, "Don't cause a scene, okay?" And left the house wearing her favorite shade of lipstick, the one Jason always said made her look like someone worth something. I sat in the very last row, the one with the burned-out spotlight and broken armrest. From there, I could barely see the stage. But that didn't matter. I wasn't supposed to be seen today anyway. I watched as the event unfolded. Speeches about grandparents, firefighters, and even one about a pet dog who helped during depression. They were sweet, well-written, safe. Then the final name was called. It wasn't mine, of course. I looked down at my hands, ready to disappear back into the background where Jason thought I belonged. But then something unexpected. A hand on my shoulder, gentle, steady, familiar. "Ella," a voice whispered. I looked up and saw Mrs. Halpern standing beside me, holding a sheet of paper. "My paper. It's your turn." My heart stopped. "I'm not on the program," I whispered. "I know," she said, quietly but firmly. But someone pulled out last minute. I spoke to the principal. He said, "If you want to, the mic is yours." The blood rushed to my ears. Every instinct told me to say no. Jason was out there. So was my mom. What if they stood up? What if they shouted? What if they dragged me off stage in front of everyone? But then I remembered the note, the essay. My dad, he always said, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you show up scared anyway. So I stood up, and the entire room seemed to shift. I walked slowly toward the stage, the paper trembling in my hand. As I reached the podium, the chatter in the auditorium faded into silence. Rows of eyes turned to me, confused. My name hadn't been printed. My face wasn't expected, but there I was. I looked out at the crowd, and there he was too, Jason, third row, arms crossed. Eyes narrowed. Mom beside him, lips pursed so tight they were barely visible. But then, just beyond them, in the very back, barely visible through the exit doors, I saw and Dot my real dad. He had come. He stood there quietly, in a simple shirt, holding a small camera and shaking hands. His eyes locked with mine, and I could tell he hadn't been invited. He probably didn't even know what was happening. But he was here, Dot. He showed up, Dot, and that was all I needed. I unfolded the paper. My essay is called, I said, voice low but growing, The Man Who Never Stopped Showing Up. The first line was simple. When my parents divorced, I thought I lost half of my world. And then I read, word for word. I told them about the nightly phone calls, the silly jokes, the way he sent me drawings instead of text messages when I felt sad, how he never missed a birthday, even if it meant mailing gifts across the country. I told them about the man who never tried to replace anyone, who never needed a title like Dad to prove he loved me, who just was there quietly, faithfully. And I never mentioned Jason once. Dot. By the time I reached the final sentence, the room was dead silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even from the teachers who usually fidgeted with their CLIPBOARDS. Dot. My hands were still shaking, but my voice didn't waver. And that man, I said, eyes on the last row, is standing in the back of this room. My father. There was a pause. Dot. Then dash applause. Dot. A wave of it, scattered at first, then rising. Some students stood. A few teachers wiped their eyes. Even the janitor, who I barely knew, clapped with both hands over his mop handle. Jason didn't clap. He stood up abruptly, face red, and stormed out the side door. Mom followed, eyes down, but my dad stayed, and that was all that mattered. When the applause finally faded, it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like the quiet after lightning, when the sky is still trying to decide if it should split open again. I stood at the podium gripping the sides, heart pounding, paper crumpled in one fist. I hadn't moved since I spoke the last word. My father. That was the name that shifted something in the room. Not Jason's, not titles, not expectations. Just truth. I didn't scan the crowd right away. I wasn't ready to see Jason's expression or my mother's eyes. Instead, I looked straight ahead, letting the silence wrap around me like a storm before it breaks. It felt wholly, somehow sacred, like something had been returned to me. Dot. Then I saw my teacher, Mrs. Halpern. She nodded. Once, softly. Her eyes weren't wet, but she was holding her breath like the rest of them. She had risked everything just giving me that mic. She must have known what it could stir up. And still she had handed me my voice. Slowly, I stepped down. My shoes echoed on the stage floor as I made my way back through the rows. People parted like waves. Students I'd never spoken to before leaned back in their seats to watch me pass. No one said a word until I reached the back. He was still there. My dad, still holding that small, trembling camera as if it were a lifeline. When I reached him, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes were full, shining. That look of awe, the one I used to see when I'd show him my drawings at age 6. It hadn't changed. Not even now. Hi, I whispered. Hi, he said back, voice cracking. Dot. It should have been the end of the story. The curtain drop. The applause. The reunion. But nothing about this moment was clean, because as I turned back to glance toward the side door, I saw in Jason. He hadn't left. Not completely. He was standing just inside the exit, arms folded, face a mask of white-hot fury. He hadn't expected to be erased from my story. I could see it all over him, like I'd robbed him of something he thought was his. My silence. My obedience. His role. My mother stood beside him, not angry, not even embarrassed, just stunned, like she couldn't process what had just happened. Like for the first time in months, She had heard me speak without the filter of her boyfriend's rules. Jason stepped forward, and for a split second, I braced for something ugly. But my dad moved before I even had time to panic. He placed one hand on my shoulder and stepped in front of me, quietly, calmly, like a wall that would never crack. Jason stopped. That moment, the silence between those two men was louder than the assembly had ever been. No yelling, no threats, just presence. One of them stood there to be seen. The other stood there to protect. Jason turned away, and this time, he didn't come back. Neither did my mother. They slipped through the side doors without a word. No goodbye, no final glare. Just two shadows disappearing into daylight. I stood. There in that auditorium, my dad still beside me. The program finished, the audience slowly beginning to stir. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Not as someone's daughter, or someone's mistake, or someone's burden to manage, but as someone who had dared to speak the truth out loud. Later that day, I heard the whispers. Some parents complained, some teachers clapped behind closed doors, some students stared at me like I was a ghost they didn't know existed, but I didn't shrink, didn't apologize. I didn't regret, because when you name the truth, when you say the quiet part out loud, people listen. Maybe not all of them, maybe not right away, but it echoes, and the echo stays longer than the silence ever did. The moment Jason walked out, something shifted in the building. It wasn't loud or dramatic, he didn't slam any doors or shout any threats, but the weight of his presence, the invisible fog he had dragged into every space we shared, lifted. It was like air returned to my lungs after months of holding my breath. For the first time in what felt like years, I could hear the sound of my own thoughts clearly, without his voice echoing in the background, twisting them, and just as quietly as Jason left, my father stepped forward. He didn't rush to the stage. He didn't try to make it a moment. He simply walked up, steady, his shoes making that soft echo on the gym floor. He stopped right in front of me. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he was smiling softly, gently, like he used to when tucking me into bed after a long day. There were no grand gestures, no speeches. Just a man looking at his daughter like she was the most remarkable person in the world. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, and just like that, the dam broke. I threw my arms around him, and I didn't care who was watching. The auditorium could have been empty or filled with every student and teacher in the district. It wouldn't have mattered, because I had spent so long being quiet, so long being small. And in that hug, I wasn't either of those things. I was whole again. The applause started slowly. A few claps, uncertain at first, then more, like rain beginning to fall after a drought. Teachers, students, even a few parents. It wasn't just for the essay, it was for the moment, the courage, the truth. Maybe they didn't understand all of it, but they saw something in it worth honoring. When we pulled apart, Dad looked at me like he was trying to memorize everything. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "I did," I answered. "You deserve to be seen." He looked like he wanted to cry again. We left the assembly together. For once, no one tried to stop me. No one told me where I was allowed to go, or who I was allowed to love, or what name I was expected to use. I walked side by side with the man who had taught me what love actually looked like, not the performative kind, not the controlling kind, but the quiet, consistent kind that stays even when it hurts. My mom didn't come home that night. Jason didn't either. I didn't ask where they went. I didn't care. In the days that followed, things didn't magically become easy. There were meetings at school, questions from guidance counselors, whispers in the hallway. Jason told people I had humiliated him. My mom said I was brainwashed by my father. Some tried to make me feel guilty, as if standing up for myself had broken something that could have been fixed. But here's the thing they didn't understand. I hadn't broken anything. I had repaired something. And in that process, I had made space for something new. My dad started coming around more often. We had dinners again, just the two of us. He brought old photo albums, the kind my mom had hidden in boxes. He helped me hang them in my room, one by one, each picture like a small rebellion against forgetting. He came to every parent-teacher night after that. He showed up to every assembly. And every time someone called him Mr. Ella's dad, he smiled like it was the highest honor he could receive. I never had to call anyone else Dad. Again, because that title isn't something you earn by walking into a house. It's something you live day after day through kindness, through sacrifice, through love. Jason walked out thinking he had lost control. What he never realized was that he'd never had love. He tried to replace a bond he couldn't understand with dominance he thought would be enough. But love can't be forced, it can't be demanded. And never, ever forgets Dot, especially not the kind between a father and his daughter. And that's why when I stood on that stage, with a trembling voice and a burning heart, I didn't speak for revenge. I didn't speak to shame anyone. I spoke to remind the world and myself that no one could ever erase the person who showed up Dot, and from that day on, I stopped whispering the truth. I let it be loud Dot and free Dot forever.